It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon at Ridgewood University, a prestigious institution known for its elite programs and towering ivory buildings. Dr. Vincent Bradford, a respected calculus professor, was in his office, pacing back and forth, engaged in a heated discussion with one of his colleagues. The subject at hand was an issue close to his heart: education, intellectual standards, and the roles that certain people, in his opinion, should play in society. Dr. Vincent was a man who had built his career on his sharp intellect and his progressive ideals. He prided himself on being an advocate for open-mindedness and fairness in academia. He often preached about the importance of expanding opportunities for people from all walks of life. However, he had a tendency to dismiss anyone who didn't fit his image of an intellectual, those who couldn't match his academic achievements or align with his lofty ideas. As he argued with his colleague about the university's latest hiring policies, Dr. Vincent's eyes landed on Mariah, the janitor, who was quietly sweeping the floors of the building. She worked at the university, keeping the hallways clean and the classrooms tidy. Mariah had been part of the university's maintenance staff for years, yet Dr. Vincent never paid her much attention. To him, she was just another employee, a person whose role seemed to be so far removed from the intellectual world he inhabited. Unaware of Mariah's sharp wit and intelligence, Dr. Vincent made a dismissive remark that reflected his narrow view of the world. "Some people are just meant to work with their hands," he said, speaking to his colleague but loud enough for Mariah to overhear. "They're not cut out for higher education. You can't expect everyone to fit into the world of theory and academia." Mariah, though accustomed to hearing such remarks, felt a pang of discomfort. She didn't let it show, continuing with her work as if nothing had happened. But inside, a fire stirred. She had heard people like Dr. Vincent speak before, people who assumed that because of her job, she couldn't possibly understand the complex problems they dealt with every day. To them, she was just a janitor, an invisible cog in the machine of academia. But Mariah knew she was more than that. She wasn't just the woman who cleaned the floors, she had a mind that could solve problems they couldn't even imagine. Dr. Vincent's voice grew louder as he continued his conversation. "We live in a world where people want to break down all the barriers, but there's a reason some people stay in their place. Not everyone is cut out for the rigor of intellectual pursuits. That's just reality." Mariah finished her sweeping and, without a word, moved on to the next task. As she passed Dr. Vincent's office, he didn't even acknowledge her. But Mariah wasn't bothered. She knew better than to react to his kind of arrogance. She had been through enough in life to understand that some people just couldn't see past their own narrow perceptions. Dr. Vincent, still oblivious to the impact of his words, sat down at his desk and opened a thick calculus book. He had been struggling with a particularly difficult problem for days. It was a complex equation that seemed to mock him at every turn, refusing to yield to any solution he could come up with. Frustrated, he scribbled some numbers down on a piece of paper, trying yet again to make sense of the symbols and equations that seemed to be spinning out of control. He was determined to crack it, but the hours were ticking by, and the solution seemed just out of reach. Meanwhile, Mariah continued her rounds in the building, moving silently from one room to the next. As she passed by Dr. Vincent's office again, she couldn't help but glance through the open door. She noticed the complicated equation on his desk, the one he had been struggling with for days. Her eyes lingered on the numbers and symbols for a moment, and something clicked inside her. Without thinking, she paused, her fingers brushing the edge of the desk as if she could sense the problem's complexity. She wasn't just a janitor. Mariah had always been fascinated by math, a subject she had studied on her own since she was young. She had learned to solve equations before most people even understood the concept of numbers. As a child, she would spend hours poring over math books, teaching herself complex problems that her teachers couldn't always explain. It was a passion that had never left her, even as life led her down a different path. She had never shared this side of herself with anyone, not even the people she worked with. Her job as a janitor was the mask she wore, but beneath it was a mind that could rival any mathematician's. Curious, Mariah couldn't resist. She pulled up a chair beside the desk and began to study the equation Dr. Vincent had been wrestling with. She didn't know why she felt so compelled to solve it, but something inside her urged her to try. She could feel the familiarity of the symbols and numbers pulling her in, and within minutes, she began to manipulate the equation in her head. The solution was unfolding before her eyes, piece by piece. It was as if the problem had been waiting for her to find the answer. Her heart raced as she worked through the steps, moving quickly but carefully. The more she solved, the clearer the path became. She was so focused that she didn't notice Dr. Vincent walking by and stopping to glance in at her. He stared for a moment, puzzled. What was Mariah, the janitor, doing sitting at his desk, surrounded by complex mathematical equations? For a moment, he was about to speak up, but something stopped him. Mariah's expression was calm, her focus unwavering. She was lost in the problem, her mind fully engaged in the world of numbers. She was in a place where Dr. Vincent and his colleagues could never have imagined her. Here, in this quiet corner of the university, she was not a janitor but a genius solving the unsolvable. It took only a few minutes for Mariah to finish her work, and when she finally put the pen down, she smiled. The equation was solved, neatly and elegantly, the answer now glaringly obvious. She sat back, satisfied with the work she had done. The solution was simple, but elegant in its own way. It wasn't just about the numbers, it was about understanding the problem in a way that others hadn't. Little did she know, this simple act of solving a difficult problem would set the stage for a dramatic turn of events. The next day, Dr. Vincent would return to his office, unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down by the very person he had so easily dismissed. The next day, the atmosphere in Dr. Vincent's office was tense. He had spent the entire evening ruminating over the unsolved equation, going over it again and again, only to find that nothing seemed to make sense. It was a puzzle that had baffled him for days. He had tried all his usual methods, but the numbers just didn't add up. Frustration had begun to take root in his mind, and with every failed attempt, he became more determined to crack the code. Meanwhile, Mariah continued her work at the university, going about her day as usual. She had never spoken about her love for math to anyone at the school. In fact, most of the staff didn't even know her last name, let alone her academic background. To them, she was simply the woman who cleaned the hallways, the classrooms, and the restrooms. She did her job with dedication and never complained, but beneath that humble exterior was a brilliant mind that had been honed through years of self-study. As Mariah cleaned the hallways, she noticed Dr. Vincent's door was slightly ajar. She paused for a moment, hearing the familiar sound of him muttering to himself, clearly still lost in his thoughts. The door opened a little wider, and Mariah caught a glimpse of the equation on his desk. It was the same one she had seen the day before, the one she had solved in mere minutes. It had been on her mind ever since she left his office, and for some reason, she felt the urge to look at it again. With a quick glance around, Mariah stepped into the office. Dr. Vincent was deep in thought, unaware of her presence. She quietly walked up to the desk, her eyes scanning the paper in front of her. She couldn't help but smile to herself. The solution was so obvious, so clear, that it almost felt like a secret she had discovered all on her own. She sat down at the desk, the quiet hum of the university surrounding her as she began to work through the equation once more. It was like second nature to her, a language she had learned long ago and could now speak fluently. Her pen moved swiftly across the paper, and as she jotted down the final numbers, the solution became apparent once again. For a moment, Mariah sat back in the chair, feeling a sense of satisfaction wash over her. It wasn't about proving something to anyone. It was about the joy of solving a problem, the rush of connecting the dots and seeing the pieces fall into place. But she wasn't expecting what would happen next. Dr. Vincent, still lost in his thoughts, finally noticed Mariah sitting at his desk. His initial shock was palpable, but he quickly masked it with an air of superiority. "Excuse me, what are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice sharp and defensive. Mariah didn't flinch. She simply looked up at him, her expression calm and steady. "I was just taking a look at the equation you've been working on," she said softly. "I solved it?" Dr. Vincent's eyebrows shot up. "What?" he asked, clearly surprised. "You solved it? How could you possibly have solved this? It's been a problem that stumped some of the brightest minds in the field." Mariah remained composed, her eyes meeting his without hesitation. "It's not that difficult once you understand the pattern," she replied quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Dr. Vincent stood there for a moment, utterly speechless. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could this woman, this janitor, have solved something that had taken him days to figure out? His mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Perhaps she had stumbled upon the solution by chance, or maybe she had seen someone else's work. But then, as he looked at the neat and clean solution she had written on the paper, a thought began to creep into his mind. He walked over to the desk and leaned in closer, examining the equation she had solved. There was no doubt about it. The solution was correct. In fact, it was elegant, much more refined than anything he had come up with. Dr. Vincent's sense of superiority faltered, and for the first time, he began to question his own abilities. "Wait a minute," he said, trying to regain control of the situation. "How did you even know where to start? You're just a janitor." His words were blunt, and for a moment, Mariah saw a flicker of disbelief and discomfort cross his face. Mariah's calm demeanor didn't waver. She simply said, "I've always been interested in math. I taught myself, over the years. It's a hobby of mine." Dr. Vincent didn't know how to respond. How could a woman like her, someone he had dismissed as nothing more than an ordinary janitor, have the knowledge and ability to solve a problem he had been working on for so long? He had always believed that people like Mariah didn't belong in the world of academia. To him, she was just another employee, someone who would never understand the complexities of the subject he loved. But here she was, showing him up in the most humbling way possible. He had been wrong. He had underestimated her, and now he had to face the consequences. Mariah stood up from the desk and turned to leave, but before she did, she looked back at Dr. Vincent. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been working here for years, cleaning these halls and classrooms. But I never once let anyone see what I could really do. Maybe it's time you learned that not everyone fits into the box you've built for them." With that, she left the room, leaving Dr. Vincent standing there, stunned and uncertain of what to make of it all. As Mariah walked down the hallway, she felt a sense of pride and relief. She had never intended to show off or prove herself to anyone. But something about Dr. Vincent's arrogance had rubbed her the wrong way. And now, she had done something he would never forget. But little did she know, the ripples from this small act would change not only her life but the way the entire university viewed her. The following day, Dr. Vincent couldn't shake the memory of what had happened in his office. He had replayed the entire situation in his mind over and over again, each time growing more frustrated. The equation he had been working on, the one he had struggled with for so long, had been solved by Mariah of all people. And not just solved, but solved in a way that made him question everything he thought he knew. Her solution was clean, concise, and, most importantly, correct. He had always prided himself on being a brilliant mathematician, a professor who understood complex problems and taught his students to do the same. Yet, here was a janitor, a woman he had never once considered to be capable of grasping such abstract concepts, who had outshined him. The thought gnawed at him, eating away at his sense of pride. How could he let this happen? Dr. Vincent spent most of the morning in his office, reviewing Mariah's solution once again. He couldn't bring himself to fully acknowledge that she had been right, but deep down, he knew he had no choice but to admit it. The solution she provided was nothing short of brilliant, and no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise, he couldn't deny the truth. But he still couldn't figure out how she had arrived at it. At the same time, Mariah was back at work, continuing her daily duties. She was used to the quiet, repetitive nature of her job. Cleaning the hallways, mopping the floors, and dusting the classrooms was routine, and she had learned to block out the noise of the university around her. But today, there was a new sense of tension in the air. She hadn't expected Dr. Vincent to react the way he had, and she wondered if he would bring up the incident again. After all, it wasn't every day that a janitor solved a problem that had baffled a professor for days. As she pushed her cart down the hallway, she overheard some of the students talking excitedly in the corridor. They were discussing the recent events in Dr. Vincent's class, but what caught Mariah's attention wasn't what they were saying about the lecture. It was the fact that they were talking about the equation she had solved, the very equation Dr. Vincent had been struggling with. They seemed impressed, even in awe, at the professor's reaction when Mariah's solution had been revealed. Mariah couldn't help but smile to herself. She wasn't interested in the praise or recognition, she didn't need it. But hearing the students talk about her work made her realize that she had done something that no one would forget. The university, which had always seen her as just the janitor, would now have to see her differently. Her actions had changed the narrative, and Mariah felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that she had made a mark, even if it wasn't for the reasons she had intended. Meanwhile, Dr. Vincent had decided that he couldn't simply let the matter rest. He had to confront Mariah again. He had to prove, if only to himself, that her solution wasn't a fluke. There had to be an explanation, something that could justify his initial dismissal of her ability. After lunch, Dr. Vincent made his way down to the maintenance area, where he knew Mariah would be working. He wasn't sure what he would say to her, but he had to ask questions. He had to understand how she had solved the problem. It wasn't just about the equation anymore, it was about proving that his assumptions weren't completely off base. As he walked through the hallway, he spotted Mariah pushing her cart toward a nearby classroom. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation. "Mariah," he called out, his voice more forceful than he intended. She turned to face him, her expression calm as always. "Yes, Dr. Vincent," she asked, her voice steady and polite. "I need to talk to you for a moment," Dr. Vincent said, trying to keep his composure. "It's about the equation you solved yesterday." Mariah paused for a moment, as if considering whether or not she should respond. "What about it?" she asked, not breaking eye contact. Dr. Vincent hesitated, unsure of how to approach the subject without sounding condescending. "I just don't understand how you managed to solve it," he said. "I've been working on that equation for days, and you just solved it in a matter of minutes. That's not something a janitor would be able to do. So, how did you do it?" Mariah's face remained neutral, but there was a slight flicker of something in her eyes. "I told you before," she said calmly. "It's just math. Once you understand the logic behind the numbers, it's not difficult." Dr. Vincent frowned, still not fully convinced. "But how did you learn that? You've never studied calculus at this level. You don't have a degree in mathematics. How could you possibly have the knowledge to solve something like that?" Mariah took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them. "Just because I don't wear a suit or sit in a classroom doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about," she said softly. "I've spent years teaching myself, reading books, solving problems. I didn't need a fancy degree to know what I'm capable of." For the first time, Dr. Vincent felt a shift in the conversation. It wasn't just about the equation anymore, it was about the way he had judged her based on her appearance and her job. He had assumed she was nothing more than the woman who cleaned the hallways, someone who couldn't possibly have the intellect to solve a complex math problem. But now, in front of him, was someone who had proven him wrong. Mariah continued, "You see, Dr. Vincent, it's easy to look at someone like me and assume I don't belong in your world. But that doesn't mean I'm not capable. It just means you're not looking hard enough." Dr. Vincent stood there, stunned by her words. He had no response. For the first time in his career, he realized how narrow his perspective had been. He had built his identity on the belief that certain people belonged in certain places: professors in academia, janitors in maintenance. But Mariah had shattered that notion. She had shown him that intellect wasn't determined by the job you held or the clothes you wore. It was about the way you saw the world, the way you approached problems, and the way you refused to be defined by other people's expectations. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he nodded slowly, finally beginning to understand the weight of his earlier actions. He had underestimated her, and now he had to face the consequences of his own arrogance. Mariah turned to walk away, but she paused and glanced back at him. "Don't forget," she said quietly, "sometimes the people who clean your floors are the ones who know how to solve your problems." With that, she walked down the hallway, leaving Dr. Vincent standing there, his mind reeling from the realization that his world had just been turned upside down. The next few days were quiet, but there was an unmistakable shift in the air at Ridgewood University. Dr. Vincent couldn't stop thinking about Mariah. He found himself lost in thought during lectures, his eyes occasionally drifting to the window, as he replayed the conversation they had in the hallway. Mariah had proven him wrong. Her calm demeanor, her intelligence, and the effortless way she solved that equation had turned his world upside down. He knew he had to make things right. The arrogance he had shown her was unacceptable. He had dismissed her because of her job, because of what he had assumed about her based on her role in the university. But now, he saw things differently. He realized that he had treated her unfairly, and he couldn't let that stand. However, the problem was, he didn't know how to approach her. He didn't want to come off as patronizing or make the situation worse. So, he did what any professor would do when uncertain. He decided to teach himself the lesson he had failed to learn all these years: humility. Dr. Vincent began to change. He started by taking a different approach to his lectures. Instead of focusing solely on the technicalities of the subject, he began talking about the importance of challenging assumptions and thinking outside the box. He encouraged his students to question the status quo, to not be afraid to go against the grain, and most importantly, to never let anyone tell them they didn't belong. As he made these changes, Dr. Vincent also began to quietly observe Mariah. She continued to do her work with dedication, as she always had, moving silently through the hallways with her cleaning cart. But now, he saw her in a new light. She was not just the janitor, she was someone who had the potential to do so much more. And Dr. Vincent realized that he had been blind to her abilities all along. One day, after class, Dr. Vincent walked down the hallway, hoping to find Mariah. He spotted her near the back of the building, carefully dusting the bulletin board in the hallway. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but then he gathered his courage and approached her. "Mariah," he called out softly, trying to sound casual, though his heart was racing. She looked up, her expression as neutral as always. "Yes, Dr. Vincent. I wanted to apologize," he began, his voice sincere. "For the way I treated you before. The things I said, they were wrong. I judged you without knowing anything about you, and I've realized that I was completely out of line." Mariah raised an eyebrow but didn't respond immediately. She continued with her task, as if she was waiting for him to say more. "I've learned a lot over the past few days," Dr. Vincent continued, his voice growing more confident. I've learned that intelligence isn't determined by your job, or your background, or the clothes you wear. It's about how you think, how you approach the world. And I want to say that I admire your mind. You've taught me something I should have known all along. Mariah stopped what she was doing and turned to face him fully. Her eyes were steady, but there was a hint of surprise in them. "You're apologizing?" she asked, her voice calm. Dr. Vincent nodded. "Yes, I am. I've been blind, and I've been arrogant. I can't take back the things I said, but I can promise you that I'll never underestimate anyone again. Not you, not anyone." Mariah studied him for a moment, and for a brief second, Dr. Vincent felt the weight of her gaze, as if she were measuring him, deciding whether or not to accept his apology. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said simply. "But actions speak louder than words, Dr. Vincent. If you want to prove that you've changed, show it. Don't just talk about it." Dr. Vincent felt a warmth spread through him at her words. It wasn't just an apology she was seeking, it was a change in his behavior, a shift in how he viewed the world and the people in it. Mariah had a quiet strength about her, a wisdom that came from experience, not from textbooks or lectures. She didn't need grand gestures, she needed him to truly learn from his mistakes. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Vincent's transformation became evident. He began to interact with his students differently, encouraging them to think critically and question the limits they imposed on themselves. He started giving more attention to the unsung heroes of the university: the janitors, the custodians, the cafeteria workers, people who, like Mariah, often went unnoticed. He even started attending the university's community events, where he had never bothered to show up before. He wanted to make sure he didn't just talk about equality, he wanted to live it. Mariah, for her part, continued with her work, though there was now a sense of recognition around her that hadn't existed before. The students, especially those in Dr. Vincent's class, began to notice her. They didn't know her story, but they respected her, and some of them even started to seek her out in the hallways, asking for her advice on the very problems Dr. Vincent had struggled with. They were curious, fascinated by the idea that someone so unassuming could hold such knowledge. One afternoon, as Mariah was cleaning the hallway near Dr. Vincent's office, a group of students approached her. They had heard about the equation she had solved, and now, they wanted to know more. "Mariah, is it true that you solved that impossible calculus problem?" one of the students asked, her voice filled with awe. Mariah looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "I don't know about impossible," she said, her voice humble but firm. "It just took time and patience. And a little bit of practice." The students gathered around her, eager to hear more. Mariah spent the next few minutes explaining the steps she had taken to solve the problem, simplifying the concepts for them in a way that made them finally understand. She wasn't just teaching them math, she was teaching them about perseverance, about looking beyond the surface, about the power of self-belief. As the students left, they thanked her for her time, their admiration clear. Mariah watched them go, a feeling of contentment settling in her chest. She had never sought recognition, but now, she felt seen. Not just for the work she did, but for the person she was: a woman with a brilliant mind, a quiet strength, and a deep understanding of what it meant to challenge the status quo. Later that afternoon, Dr. Vincent passed by her in the hallway. He had witnessed the interaction from a distance, and his heart swelled with pride. He had come to realize that the true measure of a person wasn't in their job title or the clothes they wore. It was in their heart, in their mind, and in the way they treated others. And Mariah had shown him what it meant to be truly humble, truly brilliant, and truly human. Dr. Vincent approached her once again, this time with a new sense of respect. "Mariah," he said softly, "you've inspired more people than you know. Including me." Mariah turned to face him, a slight smile on her lips. "I didn't do it for recognition," Dr. Vincent. I did it because I can. We all can. He nodded, deeply moved by her words. And in that moment, he understood what true greatness looked like. It wasn't about titles or accolades. It was about the quiet, unnoticed strength of people like Mariah, who never sought the spotlight, but who changed the world simply by being themselves. The days after Dr. Vincent's realization and apology marked a new chapter for both him and Mariah. The university, which had once been a place where Mariah was invisible, began to change. The staff and students started to look at her in a new light, and the respect that she had earned, not through her job but through her intelligence, became undeniable. Dr. Vincent, now fully aware of his previous arrogance, made a conscious effort to show everyone that he had learned from his mistakes. He became an advocate for inclusivity at the university, working with other professors to ensure that students from all walks of life had equal opportunities. He took part in community outreach programs and pushed for more diversity in the school's curriculum. And all the while, he continued to quietly support Mariah, knowing that his change wouldn't mean much unless he also recognized the brilliance that had been in front of him all along. Mariah, however, stayed true to herself. She didn't seek the attention that Dr. Vincent's newfound admiration had brought her. She kept cleaning the halls and classrooms, doing her work with the same dedication she had always shown. But there was now a quiet confidence about her. She knew her worth, and she no longer allowed anyone to define her by the job she did or the clothes she wore. One afternoon, a few weeks after Dr. Vincent's apology, Mariah was in the cafeteria, sitting by herself with a cup of coffee. She liked to take a break during her shift to relax for a moment, gathering her thoughts before heading back to work. As she sipped her drink, she overheard two students sitting nearby talking about her. She hadn't expected to hear anything, but their conversation caught her attention. "Did you hear about Mariah?" one of them asked. "She solved that math problem that even Dr. Vincent couldn't crack. I heard it was a big deal. He had been struggling with it for weeks, and she just walked in and did it in a few minutes." The other student nodded. "Yeah, and now Dr. Vincent's been really nice to her. I saw him talking to her in the hallway the other day. He even said she inspired him to rethink some of his methods. Can you believe that? He's been teaching for years, and now he's learning from someone who's, well, not even a professor." Mariah smiled softly to herself. She wasn't interested in the praise, but it was comforting to know that others were starting to recognize the truth. She had always known that intelligence wasn't about titles or positions. It was about understanding, perseverance, and the willingness to keep learning. Later that day, Dr. Vincent invited Mariah to his office. He had been thinking about how he could make things right, how he could give her the recognition she deserved. It wasn't just about solving an equation anymore, it was about acknowledging the quiet strength and brilliance that she had shown, not just to him, but to everyone around her. When Mariah arrived at his office, Dr. Vincent greeted her with a warm smile. "Mariah, I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, and I want to do something that I should have done a long time ago." Mariah raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I want to offer you a position," Dr. Vincent said, his voice sincere. "A real position, as an assistant to the math department. We've been discussing ways to make the department more inclusive, and I think you would be the perfect person to help us create a more accessible environment for students who, like you, have the potential to succeed, but haven't been given the chance." Mariah stood in stunned silence. She hadn't expected this. She had never sought a job in academia, and the thought of leaving her current role was foreign to her. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the excitement she felt. The opportunity to work alongside Dr. Vincent, to help students and challenge the norms, was something she hadn't ever considered. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of role," she said, her voice hesitant. "I've always been a janitor. That's what people expect from me." Dr. Vincent shook his head. "Mariah, you are so much more than that. I've seen it firsthand. You've shown me that what truly matters isn't the title you hold or the work you do on the surface. It's the way you think, the way you approach problems. You belong here, just as much as anyone else. Mariah considered his words. She had never imagined herself in an academic position, but perhaps it was time to step out of the shadows and into a role that reflected her true potential. I'll think about it, she said, still unsure, but feeling a spark of possibility for the first time in years. In the following days, Mariah began to reflect on the decision. She wasn't afraid of the work, she had always been a hard worker. But this opportunity was more than just a job, it was a chance to make a difference. It was a chance to show the world that people like her, the ones often overlooked or underestimated, had just as much to offer as anyone else. Meanwhile, Dr. Vincent worked behind the scenes to make sure Mariah's new role would be a success. He spoke to the other professors in the department, encouraging them to be open to new ideas and to work together to foster a more inclusive environment. He also began to push for changes in the curriculum, advocating for more diverse perspectives and approaches to teaching. Over time, Mariah's new role in the math department began to take shape. She wasn't a professor, but she worked closely with students, offering tutoring, organizing study groups, and helping to bridge the gap for students who struggled with complex concepts. Her work was invaluable, and slowly, her presence in the department became a source of inspiration for everyone around her. The students respected her not just for her math skills, but for the way she made them feel seen. She was someone who understood the value of hard work and determination, and she encouraged them to believe in themselves, even when they didn't. Dr. Vincent continued to learn from Mariah. He saw the world through her eyes now, recognizing the importance of breaking down the barriers that kept people from succeeding. He became an even stronger advocate for equality in education, and his teachings began to reflect a deeper understanding of the complexities of society and the importance of inclusivity. As time went on, Dr. Vincent and Mariah formed an unlikely friendship. They worked together to create a more welcoming environment for students, one that valued their abilities over their backgrounds or appearances. And through it all, Mariah remained humble, never seeking recognition but always quietly making a difference. The university had changed, but more importantly, so had Dr. Vincent. He had learned that true greatness wasn't measured by titles or achievements. It was about the willingness to learn, to listen, and to acknowledge the untapped potential in everyone, regardless of where they came from. And as for Mariah, she found her place in a world that had once seemed so distant. She wasn't just the janitor anymore. She was a force in the math department, a mentor to students, and a reminder to everyone that sometimes the most brilliant minds are the ones who go unnoticed until they're given the chance to shine.